So we're going to start covering moral development. And yes, you do develop morally over time. So let's warm up with this situation. In Europe, a woman was near death from a special kind of cancer. There was one drug that the doctors thought might save her. It was a form of radium that a druggist in the same town had recently discovered. The drug was expensive to make, but the druggist was charging 10 times what the drug cost to make. He paid $200 for the radium and charged $2,000 for a small dosage of the drug. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money, but he could only get together about $1,000, which is half of what it cost. He told the druggist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell it cheaper or let him pay later. But the druggist said, "No, I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it." So Heinz got desperate and broke into the man's store to steal the drug for his wife. Should the husband have done that? So I want you to take just a moment and think about what your answer would be. Do you think Heinz was right? Do you think he was wrong? Do you think the druggist was right? Do you think the druggist was wrong? So when I do this in a classroom setting, and we actually have a great conversation about it, and usually these are some of the responses that I get. A lot of people think that Heinz was right. I ask the question often, should Heinz pay a consequence, though, for breaking the law? Some people believe that he probably should, but it shouldn't be too steep of a consequence because they felt like he was doing it for noble causes. But believe it or not, however you answer actually usually changes with age and with maturity. And so we're going to talk about how that really works. There was a man by the name of Kohlberg. Kohlberg was a Harvard professor in the 1970s, and his research was all about moral development. He basically broke it down to 3 levels of ethical thinking, and each of those levels were broken into 2 stages. So you have 6 stages altogether. He said moral reasoning is the aspect of cognitive development that has to do with how an individual reasons about moral decisions. So we're going to take away the idea of Heinz and the medication, but let's bring it, I don't know, maybe a little closer to home. Let's say your family was starving and you had little children in the family. Would it be okay to steal bread in order to feed your family? Always interesting questions, right? So, the first stage is PreConventional Stage, which is basically ages birth to age about 9, where Kohlberg states that moral reasoning is guided by external consequences. Basically, in stage 1, it's punishment and obedience. That you really want to avoid punishment. And if you think about it, what do little kids want to do? They don't want to get in trouble, right? So if you ask them, "Did you eat that cookie?" No, because they're lying to you. They did eat the cookie. You can see the chocolate chip melted across their lip, but they are wanting to avoid punishment. And so that's why for them, it makes it okay to lie. For stage 2, it's mutual benefit. Right is an even or fair exchange so that both parties benefit. Basically, as long as nobody gets hurt. I remember when one of my sons came home from school and he had a $5 bill in his pocket, and I knew he did not have $5 to his name. So I asked him, "Well, where did you get the $5? And his answer was, "Well, I traded so-and-so for it with a pencil." Wait, what? Yes, I gave him my pencil and he gave me $5. And my son saw nothing wrong with that at the time because he felt like, well, both of them benefited. He got $5, his friend got the pencil, everything was good. And so, of course, we had to teach him, and it was hard because he really did not understand at that age that wasn't okay, that he was not to take money from his friends. But that would be mutual benefit. Our next level is conventional, which is basically 10 through adolescence. So this is where most of you probably find yourselves right now. where moral reasoning is guided by conforming to a social role, rules, and expectations that the person has learned and internalized. So this is, of course, divided into 2 stages, 3 and 4, interpersonal expectations and law and order. Interpersonal expectations say that right is being a good person by conforming to social expectations. So you know how to show concern for others. You follow rules that are might set by others, and you know how to behave like a good student, citizen. You know what a good spouse is supposed to look like. However, what's interesting about this stage is when you say following rules set by others, sometimes your mom might go, you can't wear that to school. And, well, Sally Jane wears it. Why can't I? Because Sally Jane, to you, set the rule that it was okay to wear whatever it was. Law and order is stage 4, which is right is helping maintain social order by doing one's duty. Obeying the law because they are laws, and respecting the authority because they are authority. This is going to be, you're going to obey the teachers because they're your teachers, not because they've earned your respect. You're going to obey the rules because, well, they were set, even though maybe nobody is enforcing them. Okay. Our last level is post-conventional, and this is basically adolescent through adulthood, where moral reasoning is guided by internalized legal and moral principles that protect the rights of all members of society. Let's go back to Heinz and the problem with the medication. In the conventional stage, you might go, if you're in the law and order stage, you might go, well, it's against the law. He stole. It is wrong. He should not have stolen. In the post-conventional, though, you're going to look at ethical principles. Basically, is it protecting the rights of the members of the society? So what is, we're saving Heinz's wife's life. Does that make it okay? So in this, there are still legal principles that right is helping protect the basic rights of all members of society by upholding legalistic principles that promote the values of fairness, justice, equality, and democracy. We also have what's called a social contract. In other words, it's something that you're doing right by others. At stage 6, though, this is where right is determined by self-chosen ethical principles. So if there is a principle that is in conflict with society, the individual will follow the principle. So, right now, actually, this is a great time to be talking about this. When we talk about, what's been going on with Black Lives Matters and all the riots and the protests, honestly, Martin Luther King Jr. went against what was in society, right? Our society laws said that people who were Black were to sit at the back of the bus. That people who were Black were not allowed the same rights as those who were white. And so he went against those principles to follow a self-chosen ethical principle that said we should all be treated with equality. Unfortunately, and this is our society has done this. I think the argument right now, I will tell you, I've done a lot of reading. I've tried to do a whole lot of listening. And we're going to talk about social psychology, I think, next week. But with everything that's been going on, it's been really interesting to really learn about how much history we have not been told in our schools. Things that have happened. If you were in history class, you might learn about what was called the New Deal. The New Deal was where they gave money for soldiers and stuff who were coming back, but it specified that nobody who was Black was allowed to have that money to buy homes or have property. And so we look at, over time, there's been a lot of things that have not been shared with us as a society, and that now we're kind of everything's hitting the fan of saying, no, it's not okay that our self-chosen ethical principles need to rise above what the social norms have been. So anyways, this brings us to universal moral principles. Gandhi is another person who, and again, Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. chose peaceful ways to protest. Gandhi did hunger strikes, but again, it was about going against the societal norm and standing up for what they believed to be right and just. So this is basically moral development. So here's what he said about movement through these stages. You really can only move through one stage at a time, basically. But you can usually comprehend the stage that is right above where you are. And so that actually helps us in our growth, basically. He also talks about, though, how social interaction promotes movement. That's one struggle, I think, right now where we find ourselves pretty isolated in many occasions. And so just know that social interaction is what helps you mature and what helps you grow as an individual. Okay, let's talk a little bit about adolescence. We're not going to go too deep into this because most of you are living it right now, but I'm going to have you go ahead and watch this crash course video, and then we'll continue.
So far, in our exploration of how the mind grows, we've talked about a lot of different philosophies and models and ways of looking at things. But here's a surprisingly useful tool for understanding developmental psychology: The Breakfast Club. This video, by the way, will contain Breakfast Club spoilers, that classic 80s movie about a band of teenagers stuck in detention one fateful Saturday morning. Do they do Saturday detentions anymore? That was never a thing at my school. That was crazy, the idea that kids would come in on a weekend for detention. You got the hoodlum, the jock, the nerd, the princess, and the so-called basket case, and at first they're all salty and standoffish with each other because, let's face it, American high schools are sort of a breeding ground for that kind of thing. But as the day progresses, they start to open up and share things and have a little fun by way of a dance montage. And at some point they each kind of crack, revealing something very important about adolescence in the process, which is the struggle between the need to stand out and the need to belong. All these kids feel tremendous pressure to maintain their image in their particular group, in part because there's just some security in belonging to a group, even if that group gets picked on by another group. And so they wear the corresponding diamond earrings, combat boots, letterman's jackets, and spectacles, and act how their roles dictate. But the thing is, none of those kids are satisfied with their outward identities. Instead, they're all stuck in the classic teenage struggle, one that German psychoanalyst Erik Erikson, yes, his name is actually Erik Erikson, called the crisis between identity and role confusion. In other words, their newly forming identities were at odds with other people's expectations of what roles they should play. Hence the confusion. The past couple weeks we've been talking about childhood as a crucial period of growth, learning, and change, and it definitely is, but anyone who's ever seen a John Hughes movie knows that there's way more to growing up than just that. And I got some news for you. From adolescence into adulthood and into old age, the drama of your personal psychological development never ceases. Never. So get used to it. Today, most psychologists view our psychological development as a lifelong process. From infant to adolescent to adult to card-carrying senior citizen, people keep right on changing. Just as Piaget gave us a helpful framework for thinking about early development, other scholars have given us ideas about how we develop through the rest of our lives, particularly Erik Erikson. Like many others, Erikson believed our personalities develop in a predetermined order, which he outlined in an 8-stage model. And each stage, from infancy to old age, is defined by its own predominant issue or crisis. If it freaks you out to think that you will always be dealing with a crisis at every stage of your life, we can just call them issues. Since we already talked a lot about early childhood development, I'm going to skip ahead to the teenage meat of it, but you can consult this table to learn about the rest. Erikson defined the adolescent years, or stage 5, as starting in our teens and extending for some as far as our early 20s, and as the Breakfast Club so artfully depicted, its main crisis is the one of identity versus role confusion. Teen years are marked by lots of of physical changes in the body and brain and sex hormones, along with the growing independence, but also a real need to belong to something. This often angsty time is when teens re-examine their identities, figuring out how to both blend in and how to stand out, often by trying on different roles. Maybe they're experimenting with punk rock or hockey or theater or ancient philosophy. Maybe sophomore year they're preppy, junior year they got green hair. Hopefully a person comes out of this stage with a reintegrated sense of self, but this stage can be particularly confusing, as I'm sure anybody watching this video can attest to. But of course, that's not the last crisis. Sorry, issue. Erikson believed that young adulthood, which in his view started in a person's 20s and ended as late as the early 40s, was marked by another struggle, one between intimacy and isolation. By this stage in life, most of us have begun exploring intimate relationships, whether that's a steady sweetheart or just an active OkCupid profile. A good relationship here can lead to feelings of safety and caring and commitment, while a lack of intimacy can lead to loneliness and isolation and depression. Recently, a number of psychologists have begun to refer to the first few years of this stage as emerging adulthood, and some suggest that it warrants its own classification distinct from adolescence or full adulthood. And at least in modern Western culture, many people in this stage do feel like they're stuck in a sort of in-between time. They know that they've pulled through all that high school stuff, but they're still pretty tied to their families. In 2011, the US Census found that 65% of people under 24 still live with their parents. Just a reminder of how things like economic factors can weigh on development. For Erikson, after young adulthood came the middle adulthood of our 40s to 60s. This stage, stage 7, highlights our tendency toward either generativity or stagnation. By now, many people have established jobs or careers or perhaps families of their own. We better understand the bigger picture of life and contribute to society through productive or generative activities like work, community involvement, raising kids, paying taxes, all that grown-up stuff. But the lack of those things, an overall boredom or absence of purpose, can make stage 7ers feel stagnant and unproductive, hence the often cliched but really real and potentially painful midlife crisis. And finally, at the end, comes stage 8. In our late adulthood, from 65 and up, we often struggle with integrity versus despair. Maybe you've hung out with a grandparent or some other senior and heard them contemplating their lives and accomplishments and reminiscing about how cheap a milkshake used to be. Well, if their overall vibe is positive, they've probably developed a sense of integrity and completeness, meaning they're pretty satisfied with a life well lived. The flip side of that is looking back on life and feeling guilt and regret. And that kind of retrospective disappointment can ruin old age with depression and feelings of hopelessness. Again, Eriksons model isn't really a perfect contemporary one, but it gave us an early idea of conflict and growth over our whole lives. His ideas have been developed further and even challenged by other scholars, but like Piaget, he remains a crucial figure to know in Western psychology. So Erikson tackled our progressive psychosocial development, but what exactly happens to our bodies and brains after we hit adulthood and keep racking up the birthday cake candles? It's hard to generalize these stages of adulthood because we don't really hit yearly milestones like we did when we were kids, and adult lifestyles can vary a whole lot. I mean, in a lot of ways, 70-year-old Mick Jagger's still living a younger lifestyle than a lot of 20-somethings I know. But despite all our differences, many of our life courses do have some similarities, physically, cognitively, and socially. First, there are, yes, physical changes. The slow decline of reaction time, muscle tone and strength, cardiac output, sex hormone production, and sharpness of senses like hearing and sight. For most of us, bifocals are inevitable, and perhaps hearing aids as well. None of this is to say that a jacked 50-year-old couldn't beat a lazy 20-year-old on a 100-meter dash, because of course how well you take care of your body counts for a lot, but still, you can't stop, let alone reverse the process of aging. The good news is our intelligence remains pretty stable throughout adulthood. Although some people might feel that their wits get a bit fuzzy with age, research suggests that while one kind of intelligence decreases after adolescence, another kind keeps increasing throughout your lifetime. Psychologists Raymond Cattell and John Horn were the first to develop the concepts of fluid and crystallized intelligence, suggesting that intelligence itself is made up of different abilities that work together. Fluid intelligence deals with your ability to solve problems independent of your personal experience and education. It's typically associated with thinking both quickly and abstractly, like teasing out the logic of a puzzle rather than remembering how to find the cosine of an angle. So relatively inexperienced teens often show high fluid intelligence. The bummer is, it peaks in adolescence, then typically starts its slow decline in the 30s. So I'm experiencing that now. Crystallized intelligence, on the other hand, is just what it sounds like. Knowledge that's based on facts, solidified by past experiences and prior learning. This type of experiential intelligence gets stronger with age as we continue to take in new knowledge and understanding, and it's part of why grandmas are so good at crossword puzzles. Both fluid and crystallized intelligence are equally important on any given day, and ideally they work together to get the job of thinking done. So in the end, some of our thinking gets rusty with age, but some of it keeps getting better. Of course, there are exceptions. While most people who live into their 90s are still pretty sharp, some will experience a substantial loss of brain cells and suffer serious consequences. Brain tumors, small strokes, or continued alcohol dependence can all progressively damage the brain, increasing the risk of dementia. Dementia isn't a specific disease, but rather a set of symptoms related to impaired thinking, memory loss, confusion, and potential changes in personality that become severe enough to interfere with regular functioning. Alzheimer's disease is a form of progressive, irreversible dementia. First, memory declines, then reasoning, and then eventually basic physiological functions as vital brain neurons continue to deteriorate. It strikes about 3% of the world's population before age 75, although from there the rate roughly doubles every 5 years. But again, not all dementia is related to Alzheimer's disease, nor is it as extreme, and while the risk of dementia certainly increases in older adults, it's important to remember that it is not part of normal healthy aging. Some memory changes are normal, but most memory should remain intact. In the end, we still have a lot to learn about the aging process. As our lifespans continue to get longer, we might need to tweak what we think we know about its effects on human psychology. In some ways, you might say that this is psychology's next frontier. By the time we figure out what that looks like, the cast of The Breakfast Club might just be ready for a reunion. And they'd better make a movie about it.
So here's what we know. Adolescence is the transitional period from childhood to adulthood. It extends from puberty to independence. Now, I think I usually call people or kids who come or students who come into my office, I call you guys your adults in training, because your bodies might look very adultish. You might feel very adultish, but yet there's a lot of maturity that still does have to take place. Again, you have to figure out who you are as an individual, who your me is. Puberty, though, that's sort of the physical changes that occur in the body as sexual development reaches its peak, of course, the period of sexual maturation, and when a person becomes capable of reproduction. This age actually has been lowering over years. The theory is because of all of the, basically all the hormones we feed our animals and everything we're doing with our food, that maybe this is causing us to start puberty at a younger age. Normally girls start their periods around 12 and a half, 13 and a half, but you're seeing more and more girls develop breasts by 8 years old, 9 years old, and some are starting their periods around 10. Back in ancient times, of course, once a child had reached puberty, that is when they were given away in marriage. And that was, again, more about survival, because the more workers you had at a younger age, the more likely your family was to make it. Cognitive development during this time. You're very much thinking on your own, but you do have what we call personal fable. You might need to know this for a quiz or a test, by the way. Your personal fable is the type of thought common to adolescents in which young people believe themselves to be unique and protected from harm. And this is honestly why some teenagers, not all teenagers, but some teenagers do some really stupid things. Like, hey, let me jump off this roof and see what happens. And I will tell you, I was part of that. I wasn't jumping off of roofs, but I was jumping off of rocks into lakes. And honestly, that is so dangerous. Now that I'm older, I can see the danger in it. But at the time, my thinking was just like everybody else that was a teenager. Oh, this is going to be great. Nothing can hurt me. Why do teenagers go faster in their cars? There's a reason your insurance is higher, because you take more risks driving because of personal fable. We care very much about, though, what other people are thinking. And we also care about what other people think about us. We call this an imaginary audience. And young people often believe that others are just as concerned about the adolescent's thoughts as they are about themselves. In other words, everybody's looking at me. Everybody's going to notice. If you have that giant zit on the end of your nose, I can't go to school like this. Everybody's going to see it, and they're all going to think badly of me. That right there is an imaginary audience. Okay, let's move into adulthood. Adulthood, again, there are physical, cognitive, and social developmental changes. Physical development, it goes downhill from here. Sorry, guys. I know we grow up and we're thinking a lot of the times, I can't wait to be a grown-up. Yeah, once you hit your, 22 to 25 years old, your body actually, that's the peak of your physical development, and you start going downhill from there. Your cognitive development. Well, you continue to grow cognitively as an adult. But at some point you might have a cognitive decline as you get into your elder years. Social development. Right now you have built-in social groups through high school usually, or through family. But as time goes on, it becomes more purposeful, your social interactions. You actually have to plan going and meeting your friends, because it doesn't just happen at school. Reflection on two major development issues: continuity and stages, and stability and changes. Again, things continue to change as we get older, but things also stay the same. If you think about your parents, how much of their life has stayed stable over the years, right? And so just to kind of think about that, and that we really like our stability. And nobody really likes change. And so as we start to change and as transitions in life happen, it becomes more difficult for us. I'm going to have you watch this quick, fun movie, City Slickers. If you were in my human development class, I would actually have you watch the whole movie. But enjoy this. It's a great take on basically the struggle with change of getting older.
My dad's named Mitch, and he's a submarine commander.
Danny.
Submarine commander? He works for WBLM radio.
Well, like Danny said, I work for WBLM radio.
Are you a disc jockey?
No, I'm not a disc jockey. You know the commercials that are on the radio?
Oh, do you make all those commercials?
No. Other people make the commercials. I sell them time on our station for the commercials to be on.
So you decide which commercials to use and when?
That's right. Well, no, it's not right. It used to be right. Seems now that I even have to check with the station manager if I want to wipe my nose. The minute he took away my authority, I should have quit.
Mr. Robbins.
What? Value this time in your life, kids. Because this is the time in your life when you still have your choices. And it goes by so fast. When you're a teenager, you think you can do anything, and you do. Your 20s are a blur. 30s, you raise your family, you make a little money, and you think to yourself, what happened to my 20s? 40s, you grow a little pot belly, you grow another chin. The music starts to get too loud. One of your old girlfriends from high school becomes a grandmother. 50s, you have a minor surgery. You'll call it a procedure, but it's a surgery. 60s, you'll have a major surgery. The music is still loud, but it doesn't matter because you can't hear it anyway. The 70s, you and the wife retire to Fort Lauderdale. Start eating dinner at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You have lunch around 10, breakfast the night before. Spend most of your time wandering around malls looking for the ultimate soft yogurt and muttering, how come the kids don't call? How come the kids don't call? The 80s, you'll have a major stroke. You end up babbling to some Jamaican nurse who your wife can't stand, but who you call Mama. Any questions?
So when you're a child, and growing up, it's easy to define your stages because some of it's based on school and school ages. Some of it is based on, there's some major milestones like becoming a teenager. Congratulations, you're 13. And the next one's 16, being able to drive, or maybe your parents set up the rule that you were allowed to start dating when you were 16. At 18, then you are an adult. You're not a grown-up yet, want to make that clear, but you are an adult. When we become grown-ups, though, and we are in the adult stages, it's much more difficult to define those stages because it's all mushed up into one. But if you think of it, the rest of those stages all were in the first 18 years of your life. And after that, it's everything else. And where do we start defining stages and differences? I will tell you, I have a father who currently is just turned 76. To him, old is 80. He has been, he watches his friends, and basically he believes that 80 seems to be the magic year when his friends start acting old. Now, again, for everybody that might look different though. So there are two theories of aging, okay? The first is cellular clock theory. This says that your cells are limited in the number of times they can reproduce or repair damage. You do have what's called a telomerase, which is the structure at the end of the chromosomes that shorten each time a cell reproduces. And so at some point, it no longer will reproduce that telomerase becomes too short. To kind of give you an example of that is not necessarily a telomerase, but it is a great example in a bigger scale. I had a friend whose husband had a weird bone degenerative disease that at age 40 he was diagnosed with in his hips, and he had to have hip replacement surgery. Well, here's the thing I learned about hip replacement surgery. They only want to give you 2 in a lifetime, and your hip replacement should last about 15 years. Well, if you do the math, and he only has 15 years twice, well, that gets him to what? 70? And what happens then? Let's see, if he was 40 to 55, 55 to 70. So what happens then, right? Well, so he had the surgery, and actually it didn't last 15 years. The titanium rod that was in the hip replacement snapped one day, and there was a problem with the rod, and so he had to have another one by age 50. The reason why they don't want to do more than 2 is because every time, and I know this might get a little graphic and a little gross, but every time they do the hip replacement, they actually have to cut a part of the leg bone off, drill into the leg bone, and insert that rod. Well, at some point, you can only do that so many times before you're really starting to shorten that leg in a way that isn't natural. And so that is why they only want to do it twice. So that cellular clock theory basically says, hey, you only have so many times that your body will repair itself. The wear and tear theory says that organs and tissues just plain wear out with repeated use and abuse. And we see that with collagen, which is that natural elastic tissue in your skin. As you age, if you have not taken care of it, if you've spent too much time out in the sun, you will see those people who look older because they've spent so much time out in the sun. You will also see those people who maybe they have been smokers or heavy drinkers or drug users. You will see they look older so much more quickly because, again, it's the wear and tear on their body. Another theory is the free radical theory. It is the latest wear and tear theory that basically it's more biological, and I'll just tell you, you don't have to know the free radical theory, but it's talking about that there's oxygen molecules with unstable electrons. Again, I don't completely understand that one, and you don't need to know that for this test. Activity theory, though, that is one you will want to know. The theory of adjustment to aging that assumes older people are happier if they remain active. And I find that to be very true. I will tell you, for elderly, retirement can be very rough. So we're going to talk really quickly, and this is stereotypes. I will tell you that. It's not tried and true. But most men do find their identity based on their career or what they do, where women often find their identity a little bit more around relationships and, basically around relationships. And so if you go into retirement, well, what's happening for a man? He's losing part of his identity a lot of times. And I've known a lot of men who go into retirement and they just sit in their chair and do nothing. They end up becoming depressed, and they really struggle in those years. Well, if a woman, if they're both healthy physically, they should be able to be out and be active and be doing things. And you see those people being the most fulfilled during those years. I've had some people who, like individual women who they're so active in their retirement years. They're busier than they were than when they worked. They're out volunteering. They're going to lunch or coffee with their girlfriends. They are out, spending time with grandkids and family members, and they're just having a blast through the retirement years. And I've known men who have also done that, but again, they are being active and they seem to be happier. Okay, so around age 50, we are considered to be in middle adulthood. During these years, women go through menopause, which means that they've stopped ovulating and their menstrual cycles end. And men experience actually also a decreased level of sexual hormones and fertility. This is called andropause. We just don't talk about it as much. Our old age, this is just going to kind of give you an overview. You don't really have to know all of this, but be aware that our motor abilities decline. I once saw a video of they put individuals into a car with a certain suit that restrained them from turning fully. That is why older people have more accidents sometimes, because they don't have the range of motion that they used to. Their motor abilities also slow down. They don't have the same reflexes that they used to. 70-year-old is no match for a 20-year-old individual. Fatal accidents increase around this age. Your sensory abilities change. After 70, your hearing, your distance perception, and the sense of smell diminish, as does your muscle strength, reaction time, and stamina. After 80, your neural processes slow down, especially for complex tasks. It just takes longer to figure stuff out sometimes. By the way, back to the sense of smell diminishing, your taste also diminishes. This is why you see older people putting salt on their food, even though their doctors are saying, you better watch your salt, your blood pressure is going up. But again, they want to be able to taste their food. Okay, that is it for this. We are going to move on to psychosexual stages with Freud, and so we'll see you then.